Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Chad Blair. A special thanks to the House of Representatives for allowing us to use this room. We were in another room, but Della Al-Baladi had seniority and had a hearing today on the Prepaid Healthcare Act. And so they were kind enough to get us a spare room. And this is cozy, and we're happy to be here today. Just a reminder, please silence your cell phones, your smartphones. That in particular goes to any of the panelists. We don't want any impromptu calls to Governor Green or anybody else, or from Governor Green. Exactly. So, yeah. And by the way, for those of you who have participated, I see many friends, many supporters of Civil Beat in the audience, too many to mention. But as you know, the Civil Beat gang, easily identifiable, and the Civil Beat T-shirts do have index cards that we will circulate at any time. Just kind of show your hand and you can write a question down. We did receive a lot of questions beforehand, but if you do have a question, we'd like to have them written down rather than have you stand up and read the question. So that is the drill. Just wave your hand and Kavika or Asia or Ashley will help you out. And that should take care of that. Two other things. You will see me looking at my computer from time to time. That's because they are using Slack to Slack me for questions that we get and other items. And so please don't think me rude. I even have it open to the website in case I got to look up a bill. Today is the halfway point of the legislature, and I'm particularly grateful for our guest today because yesterday was a long day, particularly, was it 5 hours in the House?
Yes.
Almost 4. Okay, not so bad. I remember the days, and I know Greg remembers these days, and maybe Chris. The House often on first crossover would go to like 9, 10 o'clock at night. Is that? So it's so much better to think that we finished around 2, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So there's much to be grateful about that. Just briefly, if you don't know already, Gregg Takayama, Chief, please tell us your district. Remind us of your district, please.
Sure. District 34, Pearl City.
Very good. And Chris Lee from the Senate, your district?
25, Kailua, Waimanalo, and Hawaii Kai.
Got it. And Diamond Garcia?
House District 42. 42, Kapolei, Ho'opili, and Eba villages.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience as we figure out the sound system. We're not allowed to use the internal sound system here at the House. So we bring our own in, and it takes a little while to get used to the dynamics of the room. But thank you for your flexibility on that. But yeah, quite a day yesterday, a lot happening. And tomorrow is the final day of crossover. I'm not expecting too much, but we'll see how that goes. I want to say a little bit about how we choose our guest. We do work with the House and Senate to invite who they would like to represent their chamber, both the majority and the minority. And we don't always, how shall I put it? Sometimes some people can make it. They have other commitments. For example, there's a House Finance Committee that takes care of a lot of people on that committee. As I said, Della Al-Baladi has a hearing as well on healthcare. And then, of course, there's people that go home because they're neighbor island lawmakers. All three of these gentlemen are here from Oahu. We do like to include the neighbor islands very much, but often they'll get on a plane and head back to Hilo or to Kauai or wherever they're from. We certainly want to break the Honolulu-centric nature of the legislature, but sometimes it's just easier to get the folks here. Chris was kind enough to join us for our opening session in January. He's joining us again today because we couldn't get several others. The schedules fell through. So Chris, thanks for taking the double hit here. And Diamond is, of course, a Republican. We very much try and have balance along with the Democrats. Because we feel it's very important to share those voices. I wish we had more female voices today, but I do want you to know there's a lot of effort that goes in, and I'm very grateful again for our guests today. One other thing I will just add is how we're going to do this. You know who the guests are. Basically, each of them is going to speak for 7 or 8 minutes, top of mind issues that are going on in their chamber, in their caucus at the halfway point. I'll follow up with some individual questions. And then I have a whole bunch of questions, quite a lot actually, that we received beforehand that I'll be reading from. I'll then also move to some more personal questions, issues that are important to these particular lawmakers and their districts. We'll go back to audience questions as well, and we'll see if we can bring this well under time, under wraps. And thank you again for Civil Beat, Chad Blair. Away we go. I think we'll start with Greg. Takayama, who I've known when he was actually not a lawmaker. He was a television reporter for those. Did you work at the newsprint as well?
I worked at the Star Bulletin.
Okay, so how interesting that we have a former journalist, both TV and print, now in the House of Representatives, and who is well known, notorious perhaps for his Aloha wear, and he rocks it well. Gregg, give us a sort of an update on where we are at the halfway mark in terms of the House of Representatives, the ledge as a whole, but of course the Democratic caucus.
Sure. I'd like to mention two things. First, the overall riding theme in the legislature, particularly at the House at this point, is the cost of the paying for the recovery from Lahaina. Early on, as early as a couple months ago, we thought the cost for this coming year would be about $200 million for 1 year, total of about $600 million.
The current fiscal year, too.
Yes, that's right. So we thought $200 million for this current fiscal year, $200 million for the next fiscal year, and $100 million for each of the next 2 years. That's $600 million total. Not true anymore. The latest estimates I've heard from House Finance Committee as we speak, and they're doing a hearing on the budget as we speak, is $1 billion. $1 billion. Part of it because of the federal share that we're counting on is not going to be as great, or at least it'll be contested. There are unanticipated expenses, like more than $100 million for public state workers who work during COVID and have to pay hazard pay.
Hazard pay, that's what they call it. Okay.
It's negotiated part of the contract, and that's an unanticipated cost as well. So, which doesn't leave much money for much else, unfortunately, and that's going to be one of the tough decisions that we face as lawmakers, particularly in the budgetary area. And if I could talk about one more issue.
Of course.
It's not often that the legislature passes a law that has almost immediate impact. Around this time last year, I don't know about communities in which you live, but I live in Pearl City. And the worst thing about fireworks is when you hear a blast in the middle of the night, your pets, wake up. My grandkids woke up crying, and, it creates all kinds of calamity, especially, I might say, for military veterans with PTSD. But, the aggravating thing is that it would happen randomly. If New Year's Eve, sure, you anticipate it. But when they happen at 1 a.m. and you're not expecting it, it's very jolting. And so last year we passed something called the Illegal Fireworks Task Force Bill, created an illegal fireworks task force, joint task force, federal, state, county, and they went to work pretty immediately. They seized 150,000 pounds of illegal fireworks over the last several months. And I don't know about you, but the number of random fireworks I hear has been cut drastically. And so they're up for renewal. And I'm happy to say the House passed a bill to provide them for another year of funding. And it's one of those few bills that, at least as far as I'm concerned, was well worth their money and has had immediate positive results to our community.
One or two follow-ups along this same line. Let me see if I'm getting you right. Are you saying New Year's Eve was not as bad this last time?
No, I think what happened is that people had to spend a lot more for those illegal aerials because of the confiscations. And I think as a result, they perhaps purchased less, on the black market. And so they sort of saved it for New Year's because, by all measures, I think New Year's Eve was as noisy as it's ever been. But it's the randomness of the aerial bombs that really aggravated a lot of people, me included. And that seems to have been reduced. Who knows, over the long term, if the Illegal Fireworks Task Force continues to be as successful as it is, maybe there will be a curtailing of the New Year's Eve fireworks. But for now, I think they're saving up for New Year's Eve and then blasting it all at that time.
Yeah, I live in Manoa, and whatever that, I don't know what those are, but someone tells me they're used to intentionally make birds leave trees. And they seem to work very well, but they always seem to come in the wee hours, right in the middle of the night. And I just wonder, who are these people and what are you trying to prove here? But that's something beyond my call. Greg, one more follow-up, and obviously the Maui wildfire expenses are going to be a big deal. Just for you, who have been in the House for a number of years now, and you've seen budget surpluses and deficits. Clearly, we've never had a disaster quite like the Maui fires, and of course, it impacted the Hawaii Island as well. Are you a little surprised that these numbers keep changing? That it went from 200 to I believe 600 million, and now up to $1 billion, impacting both fiscal years, the one that ends in June and the one that starts July 1st. How do you feel about that, just as a lawmaker and as a citizen? Like, why are these numbers going up?
Well, I think part of it is nothing like this has ever happened before. We haven't had a situation like this. California has had its wildfires, but that's a much larger area. We haven't had something like this to displace just so many thousand people and not really have anywhere for them to go. I think, perhaps we could have planned it better, but you can say that about COVID and a lot of other things. And I just remind people that a year ago, we were sitting here and people were criticizing the legislature for having a $2 billion surplus,
right,
and not spending it all. And so our finance money chairs said, maybe we ought to save it. You never know what kind of catastrophe could hit us next.
Well, maybe one quick follow, and then we'll switch to Chris here. Don't we have a rainy day fund of something like $1.5 billion? Why don't we just use that?
Well, the reason that we want to keep at least $1 billion in the rainy day fund is because it's used to calculate or rate our state finances for bond rating purposes. Right now, we're pretty high, AAA, and we want to keep it that way. And one of the measurements for the healthiness of a state economically is how much do you have saved away for catastrophes that could happen anytime.
Okay, very good. Let's shift over to Chris. Same thing for the Senate and the Democratic caucus. Halfway point, key issues, and of course, I'm sure you'll want to talk about the money situation. I believe you're on WHAM. Is that right? Okay, Ways and Means.
Yeah, some weeks ago, the Ways and Means Committee had a series of hearings with the administration and with the Maui County leadership to get to the bottom of really what's been going on over there. As Greg had mentioned, I think the expectation at the beginning of session was for a much cheaper cost overall. And while I think, across the board from our colleagues, we've heard, everyone has sympathy for Maui, right? We want to be helpful. We want to make sure that people can get back on their feet, that houses and homes and roads and everything can be repaired. Businesses can get back on their track to recovery. But at the same time, we want to have a handle on really what that's going to cost, because ultimately the cost is being borne not just by Maui, but by everybody, right? Taxpayer dollars, in the case of the utility, ratepayers, and folks from all islands. So what we've tried to figure out is what is the current cost that we're on the hook for up through the end of this fiscal year, which Greg kind of mentioned. And then secondly, depending on the pace of recovery, and really this comes down to how fast the counties permit and are able to build out temporary and permanent housing, what ultimately will that mean for the cost to the state as we figure out next year's budget and the one after that and the one after that? Because ultimately the risk is if we have a cost that we're not able to contain and we're not responsible for, because the state is really just paying to house displaced residents on Maui as long as is necessary until there's permanent housing. If the counties don't put that housing in place quickly, then we're on the hook on the state side for more, which means taxpayers from all the other islands are being forced to pay for that. So we've really used the opportunity to try and get a handle on the county side on where's the county at? Is the administration working with the council? How are they moving forward on all the different projects that are available? And what can we do on the state side to really help assist and smooth out that process so we can, as quickly as possible, get people back into housing? And what that means for us on the state side is a little around $1 million a day, roughly, right? That is taking us, it's costing all of us to keep people in hotels and in temporary shelters. So that's really the core of it. And then secondly, we've been dealing with a set of bills around the utility side because, as you know, the utility, along with some of the landowners, the state, basically everybody who's got some responsibility for the infrastructure or the land or what have you, is being sued. And so on the utility side, we obviously have to have a functional utility. The lights have to still turn on tomorrow, no matter what island you live in. But the bills the utility has put forward to try and recapitalize their ability to get revenue, and not only get revenue, but get financing in particular for projects for the next few years to be able to have liquidity so that they continue to fix infrastructure and build out utility lines and so forth. Those bills have been somewhat controversial on our side because ultimately they began by pushing all the cost onto ratepayers around all the other islands. And so in the Senate, we've had a number of discussions around how do we limit that exposure to ratepayers to reduce cost to ensure that the utility itself and its shareholders also have responsibility and share in those costs to make sure that we're doing what's fair by way of everybody, and making sure that as we recover, there's a clear and sound path for a functional utility setup, just as well as housing, which is more on the state and county side. So that's been really a very broad discussion. There's a number of measures moving over, just as there are from the House, as Gregg had mentioned, that will not only address the utility situation, but also provide resources for wildfire mitigation, as well as Lahaina recovery and all of that.
I think the word that is used is securitization. Can you tell me what that word means?
So in the utility space, securitization is a term that refers to basically having some sort of guarantee or backing for the funds that the utility would be able to get. So in other words, it's sort of like getting a loan that's got some sort of collateral or other backing that's guaranteed. So for an investor in the utility, you're able to get much more confidence that when they go out and spend whatever money, that no matter what, you're going to have a better chance of getting that back, and it's much more secure and stable. What that means for ratepayers, though, is that, or taxpayers, depending, you're going to be on the hook potentially for a little bit more liability, because in order to securitize the utility, to be able to provide that guarantee for future funding, you're going to pay a little bit more. In California and a number of other states where there have been similar situations with wildfires and disasters and things like that, utilities like PG&E and SDG&E and others that were in the same or a similar situation as HECO is now, worked with their lawmakers and worked with communities to come up with a similar process that would provide securitized financing that would allow the utility to continue to access capital. But it was a little bit different because those bills had both access to capital for the utilities, but also protections for ratepayers. And that was one of the things that was missing in the bills that HECO introduced at the legislature. There were no protections for ratepayers. It was full indemnity for the utility and a pass on of cost. And so in the Senate side, what we did with the Consumer Protection Committee, as well as the Ways and Means Committee that took a look at these, we put in the protections for ratepayers that ensured that costs are going to be shared, that there's responsibility and accountability, so that even though we're providing the utility with some potential financial benefit and access, this isn't something that is going to be dumped on ratepayers in the way that I think people were afraid of in the beginning.
Two follow-ups with California, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, bankruptcy was declared on the part, in particular, of the utility provider there in Northern California. Why not go that route here?
It's a very complex
I agree.
situation, but suffice it to say, the laws in California are slightly different. So on top of that, the situation is slightly different. I think, there's an attorney general's report. There's a fire department report that'll come out of the investigations that will hopefully shed some light on where responsibility and accountability are going to be for what started the fires and so forth. So pending that, I think it's probably premature for the utility. And this is me speaking as, an outsider, not on their board or anything like that, but probably premature for them to jump to conclusions. But what's important, I think, when you talk about how we ensure the continuity for the utility, is making sure that those protections for ratepayers are in place. Because even securitization as a mechanism, without the right guardrails in it, can be problematic. Because if we're, for example, saying, a utility is going to have the ability to get more capital, but it's going to cost ratepayers, X number of additional dollars per month on your electric bill, and then you have another disaster next year or a hurricane or who knows what, then you pancake on top of each other all these layers of securitization potentially down the road, then you've got all of a sudden way higher costs for ratepayers than anybody imagined. And then the utility's back in the same boat where they don't have access to capital, but everyone's paying for higher costs. So that's one of the real concerns. But, there is a path forward, I think. I want to be clear about that. As long as it's done right and cautiously. And so we'll be working with the House and our colleagues in the administration and everywhere else to try and figure that out. And I will say, one last thing, when you talk about California utilities, SDG&E was one of those that
stands for what now?
San Diego Gas and Electric, I believe. Among other California utilities,
PG&E, is that another one?
Yeah, there's actually multiple PG&Es, but yes, that's another one.
We've only got one utility company, except Kauai has a co-op, but in California, that's not the way it works.
Right. But SDG&E itself has had, in the wake of bankruptcy and fires and whatnot in the past, has had two of its best financial years in the company's history this past year and the one before. At the same time that ratepayer bills are now up by, I think, $30-something. Like, that's concerning, obviously, I think, as a result. So how you put the guardrails in place is really important, and that's just all I wanted to make
very good. Thank you for that. I'm sure we're going to come back to this topic. Diamond, tell us where we are in the House, particularly with the Republican caucus, but issues in general. And of course, you're certainly welcome to comment on the Maui fire cost.
Well, thank you, Chad, and thank you to Civil Beat for having the minority voice on the panel today. We are small in number. There's 6 members in the House this cycle. We hope to increase next year. But our job is to be that party in opposition. I think for a long time, the minority caucus is here. They've been opposing here and there, but it hasn't really been that loud. And I think what the people of Hawaii want is truly a party in opposition. This state is a one-party state. Now, we're just talking about California, similar, although there is a bit more balance there than here. But what I believe needs to happen here in this building is to have the equal hearing of different perspectives and voices. The majority for a long time has killed every single minority bill. It might get a hearing, it might pass the hearing, but that's it. It ain't going to go anywhere else. I think there was one caucus bill that passed 3rd reading yesterday in the House.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you happen to recall what the issue was, the bill?
I believe it was regarding the housing savings account from our minority caucus. You can basically set aside pre-tax dollars from your income for your savings for a down payment. So that one passed 3rd reading. It'll probably die in the Senate, but we're praying for that. But nonetheless, our job is to hold the majority accountable. Our economy is really bad nationwide right now, but even here in Hawaii, there are so many Hawaiians. Chad, this last census result showed for the first time ever that there are more Native Hawaiians who are now living on the U.S. continent than in our own homeland. And that's a problem. And there's only one party to blame for that. 70 years of power here in Hawaii with Democrat policies, and Hawaiians are being pushed out every single year. The cost of living is way too high. High income tax. Right now, they're trying to pass an increase to the conveyance tax, capital gains tax, more and more tax increases. What we need is less government, less regulation, give people a break, and let's bring our local families back home. So for us, the main issue, Chad, is cost of living.
Okay. Are you running for re-election?
I am.
Let me just push you a little bit. You said the economy nationally is not doing well. My understanding is that inflation has really come down significantly, that the job growth is really record-setting, that there's a lot of stimulation because of the infrastructure projects that were passed under
government jobs, Chad.
But I also understand private sector, for example, in solar energy and renewable energy and so forth. Is the economy really doing that bad nationally?
Yes, it is. Just ask the people on the street. I mean, people can point to charts all day long. You can twist numbers to fit your political agenda all day long. Ask the average local resident. And I was just in Foodland last night at Kamakanali in Kapolei shopping. Multiple residents will walk up to me and say, man, look at the prices here. It's ridiculous. 1 gallon of milk, $9.50. We are in inflation. And since Biden became president, the cost of food has nearly quadrupled. So that's a problem.
Okay, and I might just allow a little rebuttal, if there is one, from the Democrats on this panel, if you so wish, making an argument that under Biden, and by extension, I suppose, for the state of Hawaii, a Democrat-controlled state, things are not doing well economically. Greg, Chris?
Well, the inflation problem has been moderated in the last year or so. We've seen inflation, our economists get a hold on inflation. Job growth has been rapid under Biden as opposed to his predecessor. And I think overall the economy is doing as well as it ever has. Certainly better than it did under the preceding president.
Possibly the next one, too.
I'll just chime in. I can't speak for the House, but in the Senate last year, we had 8 minority bills that moved out of the chamber. Senator Favela had worked with a bunch of the folks on the Democratic side. And frankly, we try not to look at things in a partisan perspective to begin with. It's really what's the merit of the idea? And ultimately, how does it benefit the community or that district or what have you? And I think overall, at least in my experience over the last, I've been here a few years now.
And formerly in the House.
Formerly in the House. I do miss the red carpets, but blue's nice as well. No, but I mean, overall, right, I think, especially when it's an election year, things get, partisan and all of that. But ultimately, the issues we're dealing with are the same, right? It is how do we help people? How do we create local jobs? How do we create pipelines from school to work to whatnot and address all those issues? And I think what's coming out of the legislature this year, who cares whose name's on it, is going to do that. There's a lot of great stuff on workforce development and on even looking at things that we haven't looked at in a long time. To your point, in the renewable energy space, how do we create jobs? How do we catalyze growth in the ag sector? I think Gregg's been itching to hop on that bandwagon. Okay, well, I'll stop there. But I'm not up for election this year, so I can speak kind of
Greg
freely.
Is up. The House is up every 2 years.
So feel free to come back to the partisan question later.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think we do get along really well overall. At least I speaking again for the Senate, and that's something that I think we can say here in Hawaii that we ought to be proud of, because in other states, obviously, as everyone knows, if you read the news anywhere else, it gets way more vicious and way more divided and way more polarized and partisan. So I think we have that to benefit from here. And that comes down to people getting involved in the process, whether you're Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, or anything in between.
Okay.
I could add something to what Representative Garcia talked about in terms of Native Hawaiians having to move to the mainland, the continent. Not just Native Hawaiians. I have 2 daughters who, one of them living outside of Portland, Oregon, the other one living outside of Washington, D.C., who cannot afford to come back. The one in Oregon has a beautiful house on a tree lot with 3 bedrooms, $300-something thousand, $100,000, which there's no way she can afford here. She works as a social worker. Her husband is also employed, but even with their combined incomes, they cannot afford to buy a place here, at least something that's close to comparable, which is a good reason, an ample one, to push ahead on the housing initiatives that Governor Green has proposed. Last year, the House approved $600 million, a record amount, for Hawaiian homelands to build increased housing, and they're moving forward with that. We're giving them another year to spend the $600 million under a bill we just passed yesterday. And so there are initiatives. The House also passed a bill to enable homeowners who have a large enough lot to build additional housing on their home lots without going through a lot of red tape. So I think there are initiatives to improve our housing stock, and hopefully it'll produce enough housing that people like my daughters can come home and afford to live here.
Diamond, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chad. Yes, housing is no doubt a problem. And you mentioned it's not just Hawaiians. And I mention Hawaiians because this is Hawaii. And yes, many locals have left Hawaii, and it's sad because they want to come home. And I think what our job should be here in this building is, what can we do every single session to bring those people who did not leave voluntarily, They were forced to leave economically because of policies from this building year after year. You mentioned DHHL, $600 million. I think that is a great place to start. There's a large portion of our homeless population who is Hawaiian. And I think if we can start attacking that list of 29,000 Hawaiians who have been waiting for a long time, that's a great start. Under the new leadership with the Cully Watson, I think there's some good initiatives that's moving forward. We've been told, however, that $600 million will probably take about 5,000 to 6,000 people off of the wait list. So we still have a big chunk of 22,000 people who are waiting for a home. Myself and Senator Awa this year had introduced a bill in both House and Senate companions to ban foreigners from buying property here in Hawaii. There's been people who have said that is not constitutional. But when you talk about housing, here's my take. The governor can build all the homes he wants. He can build thousands and thousands of new homes. But if there is no guarantee that those homes are going to be occupied by local residents, you're not solving the problem. You're only perpetuating the problem. We are in the mess we're in because we have not limited the purchasing power to local residents. We are currently right now in a housing crisis declared by the governor. During emergencies, he has extra power to do certain things. Why can't there be a moratorium under this emergency proclamation where only locals can buy real property here in Hawaii? That would drive the prices down immediately. I've talked to a local family. Now, I was raised with them on the Waianae Coast. We were raised public housing, grew up with families, no sense of financial literacy. Well, they made it out. They have good jobs, good credit score. They qualified for a mortgage loan. They're about to buy a house in Kapolei. A foreigner comes in with $75,000 cash on hand over asking price, outbids them, boom, they lose it. And they're back to renting. They qualify. You know how hard it is, Chad, to qualify for a mortgage in Hawaii?
I can't afford a mortgage in Hawaii, Diamond.
A good credit score and a down payment, it's nearly impossible. But they did it, and these foreign investors came in, cash on hand, outbid them, and that's the problem. We have to put a stop to these international investors buying up property in Hawaii.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, the governor has the power under his emergency powers to suspend city and county laws. He does not have the power to suspend the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. And I guess I'm old enough to remember when George Ariyoshi tried something very similar, couldn't get it through because of that precise constitutional law that prohibits discrimination against non-Hawaii
Okay,
residents.
let's move on. Diamond, real quickly, your district, did I ask you what your district was? I apologize.
Yes, House District 42, Kapolei, Ho'opili, and Ewa Villages.
You have a sense or a grasp of the number of Native Hawaiians, percentage-wise?
Right now, probably 40% of my district is Hawaiian homestead right now. They're currently building 3 more lots. So in about 10 years, it'll probably be 65 to 70% Hawaiian homestead.
Okay, and if Hawaiian homelands can place 5,000 to 6,000, that is putting people in housing.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to some other questions. We have a lot coming in. Actually, why not this one? Why are we spending money on the stadium? This is specifically on the Aloha Stadium. This is a story that I think Hawaii News Now might have had it about a week ago, and then both Civil Beat and the Star Advertiser today it's a House bill that is kind of creeped up and surprised a lot of people. Greg, you can correct me if I have it wrong, but essentially, rather than giving $400 million to rebuild Aloha Stadium as well as its entertainment district, in fact, you would shift that back to the general fund, $250 million to build a new stadium, not remodel Ching Field, build a new stadium at UH Manoa. I hope I got that right, but this is a pretty big issue. And your colleague, actually my representative, Garrett, right? Is it? Yeah,
Garrett.
He's brand new. I apologize.
Andrew Garrett.
Andrew Garrett, thank you. Said that we can't do this when we have to get all this money to help Maui. You want to comment on this? Why are we focused on, or why are some people or some chambers focused on rebuilding Aloha Stadium?
The concern about that is about the cost of building at Aloha Stadium in Halawa, is that even though the state set aside $400 million to subsidize the cost, that's not all of the cost. Another part of that measure also provides $50 million in annual subsidies for about 10 years to whoever the developer is for the cost of managing the stadium. It's a giveaway to whoever the developer might be. And instead, I think it makes sense to shift the stadium to the University of Hawaii Manoa campus in whether they expand Ching Field or rebuild it altogether, to have the center of athletics be there. You think about the cost of building Aloha Stadium for what is basically 7 University of Hawaii football games every year. And that's and even when UH has their games there, they don't make money from it because they don't get revenues from concessions. They don't get revenues from parking. They get all of that at Ching Field. So it makes economic sense, especially in a time when we just talked about how the cost of Lahaina could escalate to $1 billion over the next few years. It's not the right time to be spending $500 million on a new stadium at Halawa.
Okay, Chris, this bill is going over your chamber. One of your colleagues, Glenn Wakai, I believe that's his district, isn't it? Very much championing this issue for years. Your response, I'm not asking you to speak for Senator Wakai, but the bill is now in the Senate's hands.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll go to, I presume, the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm not sure where else it went in the House. Economic development, yeah. So there'll probably be a couple committees assigned, I imagine. I haven't spoken to anybody about this bill, so I can't speak for colleagues or anything. But yeah, Senator Wakai has been a huge champion for redeveloping that area, putting in, doing something more with it, particularly because it's in the TOD area on the rail line. And I know on the Manoa side, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion lately about what do we do with improving university infrastructure and housing, and parking has been a huge question. So anyway, all of these things are ripe for discussion. I don't know where it's going to go, but I imagine our colleagues will be weighing in, particularly because you overlap with Glenn, right?
Yes.
Maybe. Oh, yeah. So particularly the area representatives and senators.
Mm-hmm. But the rail line stops there now.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to go to the university to begin with. So
good point. Greg, did you want to add something?
Just to add another thing is that as much as we talk about expanding the site of Halawa for commercial, residential, and everything, there are limits to what the infrastructure there can support. The infrastructure there can support 50,000 people at a stadium. That's the count. If we build a 35,000 seat stadium, it can accommodate 15,000 more people sewage-wise. For residential, commercial uses, anything else. So there are limits at Halawa to what the site can support. And there will be expanded sewage capacity, but that won't happen for another 10 years. Okay. And so, as much as we idealize the idea of making this vast commercial residential area around the stadium, the Halawa Stadium, it just doesn't pencil up.
What about concerts? We've had Michael Jackson, we've had Rolling Stones, Bruno Mars, local boy. What about that? I mean, a much larger venue than Blaisdell.
I'm certainly not an expert on it, but from everything I hear, there are limits to what concerts can be offered here because of the extremely high cost of staging these concerts. These concerts aren't just you or me standing with a microphone in front of the stage. That's elaborate and requires all kinds of equipment that costs vast sums to ship here. Okay. That's why there's been a real reduced demand for sites like Aloha Stadium.
Okay, Chris, and then Diamond, I want to see if you have a position.
Yeah, no, that I can comment on a little bit because we have been working with some concert promoters and others, not specifically on the stadium project, but just on creating venues that fit and right size the audience to the kinds of productions that would come through. Not having adequate facilities either that are modern and can accommodate the volume of people that would be needed, or that are up to par and can support that kind of technology and equipment and all that stuff has been a real deterrent. That's been one of the huge reasons we've been finding that we cannot bring shows in. So making sure there's something that fits the size of the audience, which is bigger than the concert hall at Blaisdell, bigger than the Blaisdell Arena, and then also bigger than what exists at the university with the Stan Sheriff Center currently, is important for those larger shows.
Okay, but no Beyonce or Taylor Swift, it sounds like.
Well, they're welcome anytime.
Diamond.
Well, Stadium. I live along the rail line. I moved to Ho'opili in 2021. It's the second to the last rail stop going out west. I see it pass every 10 minutes from my lanai. Maybe one person every hour that's on it. No one's riding it, and really because there's nowhere to go. The whole thing was, hey, let's jump onto a UH football game one day, or let's go to the swap meet on the weekends. And now there's nothing. And so, yeah, some people take it for work if they have to. They'll jump off and transfer to a bus. But I honestly think something needs to be in that location. I'm not too sure about attaching housing to it because, like Greg mentioned, the infrastructure, there needs to be an expansion to the infrastructure if we're going to be building thousands and thousands of new homes like the governor is pushing for. But Hawaii needs to be and have a stadium that can hold these big, wonderful games. And I think Hawaii can be, as my colleague Rep Ward likes to often say, the sports center of the Pacific. If we can bring sports games from the Pacific, from New Zealand, rugby games, and from Asia to come and compete in Hawaii to help spark tourism, that would be a good thing. I voted no on Andrew Garrett's bill yesterday.
So did Rep Ward, if I recall correctly. To all three of you, Diamond, we'll start with you. This is arguably the most important, what we call a sunshine bill, reform bill that could change the way politics work here. It died in the waning hours of the last session. What will you do to make sure the bill to increase public funding, comprehensive public funding for clean competitive elections become law? This is Carl Rhodes' bill. It has passed out of the Senate and it is in the House. Would you support that bill, Diamond?
No. I do not support that. I don't support public funds and taxpayer dollars being spent on, candidates that people might not support. So right now, there is a public funding option. Now that chunk of money is
it's a partial public funding.
Partial public funding,
right.
Yes, and that chunk it pretty much just sits there because you might have one or two people each cycle who uses that, but the vast majority chooses not to use partial public funding because their contributions are capped. And so most candidates would much rather just fundraise on their own. I think if somebody wants to be a public servant, they want to run for office, it's up to them to convince the people, the business owners, the residents in their community to support them and their campaign for office. So I do not support my tax dollars being spent on progressive liberal candidates who are running for office.
What if it helped Republicans get elected?
Hey, we believe in hard work and grit. So we're going to go out there and raise our own money.
Okay. Chris and then Greg?
The Senate passed a bill, I forget the number right now, but the Senate passed a bill for partial public funding to expand that program.
This is a separate bill because we do have an existing state system, partial public funding. There is a bill to increase that, correct? But
Right.
We're also talking about a full funding. Comprehensive is the word that we use.
Yeah. So that bill's going over to the House right now. It's got a clean date on it, which means essentially if the House agrees, it goes straight to the governor. But I think to the points that we're talking about when it comes to sunshine and transparency, I think fundamentally in our existing system where the Supreme Court of the United States has said money is speech, money plays a significant role in elections, whether we like it or not. And the question is, do we want to rely on people having to spend money to get attention and pay for mailers and advertising and all the things you need to campaign to successfully get elected, funded by some specific interest, or do you want it funded by a pool of money to which the only people you're accountable is the public that you represent? That is fundamentally the question. So that is the bill that's moved over from the Senate to the House right now for consideration.
You support it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I have a couple concerns with the bill that was sent over from the Senate. Two of them. One of them is the cost. The cost is upwards of $30 million. And even though it doesn't take effect, I think, until 2028 under the proposal, $30 million is still $30 million. I mean, we talk about making choices in a tight budget year. The cost of expanding the Hawaii Promise program to all four-year campuses at UH, which is basically free college education for those in need, cost is $22 million. The cost of giving every school child in public schools a free lunch, $36 million. So compare that. We're not spending $30 million in a vacuum. We have to make choices. And that's a big choice to make. And it would be to sacrifice other probably more worthy programs to fund something like fully financed public elections. And the other part of it is that we talk about the bill possibly removing special interests from elections. Well, I think the biggest spender in terms of the last few elections are the millions of dollars spent by independent political PACs, political action campaigns like PRI and others, millions of dollars for or negatively against candidates.
Did you mean PRI or PRP?
Yeah, I'm sorry. PRP, of course.
Public
Apologies
Radio,
to PRI.
Public Radio International versus Pacific Resource
That's right.
Partnership.
My
Yeah,
apologies.
the Carpenters Union Super
Yeah.
PAC.
Exactly. This bill doesn't change any of it.
Yeah, you could still take
Because-
that money. You couldn't take the public money, but you could still take.
Well, you don't take any of it because they're independent expenditures, and that will continue. There's nothing that we can do under U.S. Supreme Court rulings to curb that because, as Chris said, that's considered freedom of speech. But this bill doesn't affect that at all.
So we have
That'll
a
continue.
Democrat, Gregg, agreeing with a Republican, Diamond. Hey, progress.
Yeah, there's,
we get along.
Yeah. Chris.
no, there is one to Greg's point. There's not much that we can do about Citizens United and the Supreme Court precedent set at the federal level. This public financing question would go a long way in our local elections, but there is one bill that we also sent over separately, which does address some of that super PAC, really, behind the scenes, sort of black market spending, that the dark money in politics where everything goes into a PAC, as Gregg had mentioned. You don't know where the money came from. You don't know how it was raised. And all of a sudden it's out there spending millions of dollars on ads for or against people or ballot issues or who knows what. And right now there are a couple places that have already done this. You've got laws on the books that would prohibit and limit foreign influence in our local elections. There's a lot of foreign ownership of companies that are operating within the United States and certainly within Hawaii. And you've got a lot of those folks putting money into these kinds of PACs around the country for a number of elections now. One of the bills that we pushed over to the House would prohibit, which is legal under the Constitution. It's not been overturned or anything like that by any court yet. But would prohibit foreign influence and foreign dollars entering into that pipeline of election spending. So that's something that we're hoping will, along with some of these other discussions about how we improve transparency in government and ethics in elections and so forth, will have hopefully be considered.
Okay, good. I do want to ask Diamond one more question, and then I'm going to switch back to questions that I have and then go back to questions from our audience. And my question to you, and Diamond can go first here. If someone like Alexander and Baldwin or Hawaiian Airlines or PRP gives you money, donates to you, if Bob Toyofuku writes you a check, Bob is in the audience, or he was in the, oh, there he is. Hey, Bob. Do you take their phone call when they call you to talk about a bill? Diamond.
Well, I'm a Republican, so
you don't get
when
money
you look
from,
at our fundraising. Just look at our campaign spending reports. Most of what we get is from residents in our district, from local business owners. I hardly get. I think I got one union endorsement, and that was Shopo. The unions, they all endorsed my opponent, but it's the Democratic Party, Chad. Talk about transparency. It's their party that has all these contributions from unions, from all these different big corporations and political action committees who help them out a lot during their own primary election. So because we're so small, I think they just don't care. But if we were to increase numbers, I'm pretty sure there would be conservative PACs stepping in. There was a conservative PAC that did run some ads against my opponent this last election, and that was not from my campaign. But that was a locally owned PAC. But I do support the bill that Chris mentioned to ban and stop foreign money from being involved in our local politics.
It should be clear, Republicans, anybody can give a donation. And I know there's a lot of lawmakers that don't even know where the money's coming from, but I have seen A&B and other companies, we're using that term special interest, but unions, it applies to any number of groups that have given to Republicans as well. So they are getting money. So the question is, if you do get money, do you take their call Because they
for
gave you
bills,
money.
yeah. No, I don't, and they don't call me because I can't get bills passed anyway. So.
Chris and Greg, does a lobbyist donating to you a special interest? And mind you, these are people with many of legitimate interests, and they have a right to lobby. I think even Hillary Clinton said that. I don't hate lobbyists. They're people trying to get something passed probably for, in some cases, altruistic reasons. But how do you feel about it if you get money from a big corporation or a union or other interest?
My door's open. I get meetings from lobbyists. I get who give money to me. I get meetings from lobbyists who don't give money to me. I leave my door open. I literally leave my office door open because it's my philosophy that, a closed door signifies a closed office, and it drives our building managers mad because the AC comes out of it. But I insist on keeping my office open to anyone who wants to stop by to say hello, and they don't have to be from Pearl City. They can be from anywhere, and I welcome them. I welcome the opportunity to talk to a variety of people, not just lobbyists, but residents and citizens and all kinds of people who walk in. Happy to talk to them.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, I will talk with anybody, and over the many years, I think I've had an opportunity between elections to talk with folks. I think I've talked with people I agree with, people I disagree with, certainly folks who have donated money, folks who have not. But at the end of the day, even if you show up to a fundraiser, I may thank you, but then vote against whatever it is you're saying because I think it's a bad idea or won't be beneficial for the community or what have you. But that's exactly the reason why, for the public financing question, right, we're trying to create distance between those who have access and those who are making contributions. For myself, I haven't even had a fundraiser since before the pandemic. So maybe, 4 years now or something like that. For me, it's a question of, sure, I'll run for re-election down the road if when the time comes, but nothing I do now, I've realized over time, is going to influence that process. Because for me, when I first ran and was elected, I think like a lot of new candidates, right, you raise a lot of money, you do a lot of work, you put in the effort. I don't think anybody of any party runs to be in office for nefarious reasons. I think everybody goes in with the best intent to try and do what they want to do for their community or their district. I was, at a time, in my first couple elections, constantly thinking about, okay, I need to get reelected. What am I going to do? How do I vote on this or that? Or I need to raise money, et cetera. But when I was 30, I ended up having a stroke and was in the hospital for a week. And at that time, really regretted running for office for a whole host of reasons. Because I think, hadn't been able to accomplish much, and it was very frustrating. I felt like I let down everybody who had been there to help campaign for me and everything else. And at the end of it, I decided, I want never to feel this level of regret again. So for me, I'm going to do whatever I feel is the right thing to do, hands down, no matter what. If I lose, I lose. No big deal. That's not going to stop me from getting in front of a very controversial or otherwise unpopular issue if all the data and evidence shows that this is the right thing to do, which is why the subsequent year and the next few years I got involved in a whole bunch of controversial stuff, from same-sex marriage to shutting down this multi-billion-dollar deal with the utilities and all kinds of stuff like that. So I think, everybody's here for a different reason. Whatever it is that's important to them, I think drives them. But for me, it doesn't matter where the money comes from. It influences pretty much zero of what I do.
Okay, let's stay with you on speaking of controversy. It was a 13-12 vote yesterday in the Senate against confirmation and really reconfirmation of Alapaki to the Board of Regents. You voted with the 13 to deny the nomination. Can you shed some light on what exactly was going on there, not only for your vote, but that what appears to be a clear division in the state Senate?
Sure. So just for folks out there, one thing that's different between the House and the Senate confirms nominees that the governor puts up, typically the governor, but in this case, there are other cases as well where nominees for important positions have to go before the Senate to be confirmed. That means a majority vote saying, yes, we think you're going to be great for this job or appropriate or what have you, which means 13 votes out of the 25 is typically what you'd need. Yesterday, we had a vote on a confirmation for a nominee to the UH Board of Regents. or I should say reconfirmation.
Correct.
He'd been serving in that capacity for some time. That's Alapaki Nahalea. I don't have a personal history or relationship with him. And I'm also not serving on the Higher Education Committee, which was the committee that had that confirmation hearing. So I can't speak. I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I'll speak, I think, generally to some of the discussion that was had amongst the caucus, which was a lot of support that Alapaki was a great guy, super nice, has been involved in all kinds of stuff over the years, have been working, I think, with great intentions and everything else. Some of the criticism that came out of the discussion, as our higher education chair had mentioned, was about accountability at the university and a number of issues which didn't get focused on, particularly when it comes to like infrastructure and other things, and how the relationship amongst the Board of Regents plays out and what that means. So those were this really condenses about 6 hours of hearing plus floor debate into 20 seconds. So there's a lot more there if you want to go look. But there's one thing you mentioned at the end, which I think I really wanted to dispel. And you had mentioned that the Senate was divided, or this signals that there's a divide in the Senate. I don't think that's the case. The Senate has had a number of confirmations right after the governor was elected, and then before then in years past on a number of different things, and also different bills. And in my experience, the Senate has been much more, I would say, small d democratic. Everybody kind of goes their own way sometimes. There's no clear, this faction is going to support this and that faction is going to support that. It really comes down to individual experience and what those merits of what they're looking at are, and their history and so forth. And I don't think this reflects any sort of factional or any longstanding divide.
Okay,
I want to make that
to
clear.
be fair, it was a 25-0 vote for Lauren Akataki and a 22-3 vote to Neil Abercrombie. Let me just follow up with one more, and I am going to ask the House reps who do not have to consent and advise, and who may want to or not. You hear talk, as a journalist, I hear this, people out in the community, the university, the legislature, that it's horse trading going on behind closed doors, that if I get your vote against this nominee or for this nominee, I'm going to make sure you get that CIP project, or I'm going to make sure your bill gets through. Can you comment on that? Because to people out there, cynically, they think that it's a done deal and this is all done behind closed doors.
I don't think anything's a done deal, in either in the House or the Senate, frankly, at least in my experience. And certainly in the Senate, in the last few years, we've had a number of really contentious either nominations or bills. I don't think I've never seen a obvious quid pro quo of you vote this way and or you lose this or we'll support that or anything like that. And in fact, in this particular vote, it was quite fluid for a number of days. And granted, I came into this late, right? Again, I'm not on the committee that heard the nominees' confirmation hearing, which was last week, I believe. But talking with colleagues just in normal chatter, some folks were raising concerns early, others were late, and what the perceived vote count was, changed over time based on, I think, what the nominee and others were doing, and certainly what was being heard from the public. And there was a huge outpouring of emails and calls and things like that toward the end. And I didn't get a chance to talk with the nominee myself, unfortunately. I don't think I'd found out, I think, Monday morning or Monday midday.
Well, he didn't have much time either because the vote was scheduled rather quickly, if I recall.
Yeah, well, I will say, a lot of times, traditionally, certainly with the first round of nominees from the governor after his nomination or his election the first time, most of the nominees, and there's one for at least each department, right? Each department director plus usually deputy directors, those folks would typically reach out weeks in advance so that you had a chance to talk with them and understand who they are, and they could pitch you on what their vision was for their department or their plans. This was a little bit different. So I think that probably weighed in with at least some people.
Okay. All right. We could stay with it. Diamond, I thought I saw a smile cross your face while Chris was speaking on this issue.
What part, Chad? As far as backroom dealings and CIPs and all that. Once again, the minority perspective. So we're not in their caucus meetings or their caucus rooms. I don't know what goes on there, but I know for us, I've heard stories, that, hey, if you vote against someone's bill or you say something to someone on the floor, and unfortunately, sometimes some chairs and some people, I'm not saying they're here now, but perhaps in the past, can be immature. And this building can almost be like a high school sometimes, very immature. So, I've seen it here and there. I know typically for Republicans, we normally get very low CIP funding just because we're conservatives and we're in that minority. That's just a reality. But the good thing is we were able to get some funds passed in last year's state budget. The good thing is, Chad, in my district, because it's brand new, they kind of have to give CIP funding because we're building a new high school, we're building new roads, we're building new this. So money has to come in. But typically, if you're a Republican, that's just the way it is.
Okay, Gregg.
Going back to the confirmation of the Board of Regents chair, Chad, Chris talked about...
Chris and Chad have never been confused for each other. I can just tell you that. This is a first.
Chris talked about the nominee going through a 6-hour confirmation hearing. I followed some of it, but it's my understanding that he wasn't accused of doing anything wrong or illegal. It came down to a matter of leadership style, and my concern really is that this is an unpaid position. I mean, people who are on something like the Board of Regents or Board of Education are stepping into a position, and they literally volunteer many hours of their time to something that they're not paid for. And so I'm afraid that it might have a chilling effect on people who are willing to step forward, especially on boards and commissions that face tough challenges. If they're going to be held accountable for everything that's wrong, what incentive is there for them to step forward and volunteer their time and efforts and energy? That's my concern.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on. Chris, just to you, this is from the audience. What do you hope to accomplish with SB 2565? I don't know if that's your bill, but it prohibits counties from prohibiting. Does it make sense? Prohibits a county from prohibiting. It has to do with dog excrement in public or private property, if I have that correctly. I tell you, dog bills, cat bills, feral chickens, there's always a lot of animal bills, but I hope I have this right about cracking down on, forget my language, dog crap.
I'm going to resist making so many puns in this response. So this bill actually came out of a number of requests from constituents. Right now, and I don't want to speak for the counties. Each county is a little bit different. But right now across...
it is your bill, isn't it?
It is. It is my bill. Okay. Yeah. Right now across Oahu, at least, there are very few parks, relatively speaking, that allow people to bring their pets while leashed. So even if you have your dog on a leash or what have you, you cannot go down to, for example, most beach parks, most regular parks, you just can't. And so it's really difficult to be able to get outside, especially when you're living in an apartment downtown. You don't have a backyard where you can go. So there's been a lot of requests for how do we create more opportunities for that sort of thing. In fact, the second part of the bill, which was also part of requests from a whole other set of constituents, is how do you keep people who are walking dogs from just letting their dog poop everywhere and then they just walk off. And so there's a penalty section in the bill which helps solve that problem not only at parks but also throughout the rest of the island. So that if you're not responsible in picking up after your pet, there's a fine there. And this is something that's been enormously successful in other places, in a lot of other cities around the country. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. So it's a carrot and stick, but provides opportunity for those, particularly in urban areas, that don't have the opportunity to get outside. The second thing that I'll note here that's really interesting is, right now, people just go anyway, regardless of what the law says. People just go, they take their dog down to wherever. And that is problematic because now you've got conflict and it's unclear what's happening and who's supposed to be where. And in particular, on our side of the island, where you have a lot of wetlands and things like that, you have dog owners that have no other choice but to go down to the beach park. And so if you walk along Kailua Beach, for example, any Sunday morning, you have dozens, maybe hundreds of people out walking their dogs. And along marshes and other places where there's trails and things, you have people taking their dogs there because they have no other place to go. And there's a lot of endangered bird habitat and things like that. So creating safe spaces where people can go that are designated seems to be a good idea. So this was an idea from folks who wanted to start that conversation and basically compel some sort of engagement from either the counties or others to try and solve the problem.
Okay, good. Diamond, Greg, anybody want to step on this issue?
Well, this isn't a partisan bill, but instead of putting free menstrual products in men's restrooms, how about putting some free poop bags everywhere on every corner? I think that's a better use of taxpayer dollars.
Interesting notion. A very, very interesting. Greg, anything on that? We're going to pass on that one. Wise choice there. If I remember, Diamond, in the caucus, the Republicans have pushed for this in the House time and time again, an exemption of the GET, the general excise tax, for medical supplies, for food. It comes up if you meet a certain income level. There is a bill that actually has some bipartisan support. HB 1675, Lauren Matsumoto, the minority leader. I think Elijah Parrick is on there as well. Currently written, it would exempt medical services provided by doctors and nurses when they are in the capacity of caring for people as primary care providers. They would exempt the GET. It's alive. It has passed out of the House and over to the Senate. You first on this one.
Thank you. Yes. Our caucus, House and Senate, whenever there was a Republican in the Senate for, I think, 4 years, there was none. But for every year for the last 30 years, I believe since 1992 or 3, we've introduced the GET exemption on food, medicine, and hygiene products as well. So that would be like your toothpaste and toothbrush and deodorants and all that stuff. Basic necessities that everybody uses every day. I believe 2 years ago, the latest stats, we were one of 7 states that still taxes food. And so, it's interesting, Chad, because during the campaign, Governor Green campaigned on this.
That's right.
And then right when he won, never mind. So, that's unfortunate.
I think it's in part because not in part, but in large part because the GET is the primary revenue funder of the state.
Yes, but this would be direct relief. The Democratic Party here in this building likes to push not lots, but some tax credits here and there. But lots of people are unaware of what credits pass each year, and they're not even aware to apply for those credits when they're filing their taxes. What we should be doing is not just tax credits, but immediately tax cuts. Exempting food and medical services. So there's one bill, yes, that would exempt medical services from the GET tax. I believe currently we're just one of 2 states that taxes medical services, Hawaii and I believe it's New Mexico. So it's about time. We have a doctor shortage here in Hawaii, a medical provider shortage. One of their reasonings for not wanting to practice here and have their own practices here is the GET tax on their medical services.
Okay.
If I can mention that, I'm glad you brought up that bill, and I'm glad that it was introduced by Lauren Matsumoto. I honestly didn't realize that it was a Republican bill, which just goes to show.
Looks like it's bipartisan.
Every once in a while, when you stumble upon a good idea, the Democratic majority takes up on it. And I might mention that bill applies to not only physicians, but also any primary care provider, which includes advanced practice nurses.
Important clarification.
Who are in their own practice, not associated with a hospital.
Got it. Thanks, Greg.
It's a good bill.
Chris.
I was just going to add on while we're talking about the cost of medical stuff. There is a bill the Senate's moving over which would build on efforts in other cities around the country, which looks at medical debt. Right now, in most places, you have a lot of uncollected medical debt, which is sitting in collections agencies because, as we all know across the country, like the number one contributor to immediate bankruptcy in most families is a sudden case of, oh my God, I have to pay for my mom's cancer treatment or whatever. And, this is tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in a lot of cases. In Hawaii, the best estimate that I've seen is that about 15% of all families have some form of medical debt that they'll just never be able to pay off. Right now, that comes out to roughly about $500 million worth on the whole. And there are programs being run in other places right now through partnerships with nonprofits and others that will go to collections agencies and buy up all that unpaid debt and just outright cancel it. So the bill going over to the House right now would authorize the Office of Wellness and Resilience, which is in the governor's office, to be able to partner with our local healthcare community and providers, find out who the full universe is of everybody that has unpaid debt that is just strangling them and reducing credit scores, making it impossible for them to be able to get loans for houses and everything else, and buy out that debt for literally 1 penny on the dollar and cancel it.
Got it. Forgive me for looking at trying to multitask here, but we're on to the next question. I want to make sure I had the status of the bill correct. Another question from readers: will assault firearms be banned? The bill as it reads now, which did pass from the Senate over to the House, but with some great reservations, and I think you're on Judiciary. It would currently prohibit assault weapons to include 50 caliber rifles and assault weapon attachments. Shotguns were removed, I believe, from the original version, last I checked, but clarify if I have this right. But it goes to, and I know there's a lot of quibble over what an assault firearm is, but it is in response to these mass shootings that we're seeing even in our own island here. Diamond, you voted against it?
Not yet. It's coming over. It's coming over. I will vote against it, though, Chad. That's certain. I will vote against it. I believe it's an infringement upon our constitutional rights. We're talking about mass shootings, right? And this is something that we should for sure be looking at because here in Hawaii, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when something bad happens. It's happening everywhere around the world. And it's not the gun that kills people. It's mental illness that does this. Recently in West Oahu, in my community, there's been lots of shootings. And these are random shootings too. There was one uncle who was washing his truck in his own driveway, and there was an altercation about half a block down the road, and he got shot in the head and died. There was a guy who was at the Kapolei skate park, stabbed 19 times. There was a gun just this morning at Kamakanali'i, and HPD swooped in and made an arrest. So the issue is this, Chad. Banning assault weapons is not going to cut down on crime. It's not going to stop mass shootings. You can ban all guns. Well, guess what? Guns will still be here. Most of the crimes happening in West Oahu those criminals are using illegal firearms. They're not even registered firearms. So you can pass all the laws you want, banning this and banning that. Criminals don't follow the law. They will still get their guns and they will still perpetrate and conduct their crimes. So what we need to do and what we should do is pass stiffer penalties for those who are using illegal firearms. If someone's caught using or possessing a firearm that's not registered and that's illegal, there should be stiff penalties for that and not attacking law-abiding gun owners.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, I don't decide whether to vote for or against the bill till I've heard the bill, read the bill, and heard arguments on both sides of it. So I don't make a decision ahead of time. The gun lobby tells us that if we crack down on guns, we make it harder for them to defend themselves, to defend their loved ones from armed assailants. And the truth is, they're more likely, if you own a gun, to use it against a loved one, accidentally shoot yourself, or have someone in your family shoot themselves and commit suicide. If we honestly believed that more firearms provided greater safety, America would be the safest country in the world. And it's not, because we have by far more firearms than any country in the world. And yet our violent rate of death is the highest in the world as well.
Okay. Diamond.
If I could,
Chris.
Chad, just want to say in 1960, there were a lot more firearms in American households and there were far less deaths. It's not a matter of firearms because firearms don't kill people. It's something's changed in the citizenship of this country. Firearms does not kill people. It's someone who pulls that trigger that kills people.
Okay. Chris.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I think it's clear that when you look, to Gregg's point, at all the other states, particularly in the last, let's say, 20 years even, there are rates of gun violence that have escalated significantly, and rates of fatalities that have escalated significantly in states that have loosened their regulations and ultimately done away with simple common sense things like background checks. I don't think, I disagree with my colleague here, that charging somebody after the fact for illegally using or acquiring a weapon is the way to go, because at the end of the day, it's too late. There are people who are going to be dead. Often they're school kids in other states, unfortunately. The thing about this bill in particular, to return to the subject matter, the bill basically focuses on 50 caliber weapons in its current form. And secondly, focuses on really high capacity magazines, over 20 rounds for rifles. And this is stuff that has been on the books in a number of other states already for many, many years, and has proven itself to be effective, not at stopping every single crime, to your point. We'll never be able to stop every single shooting and every single crime everywhere. But there is significant and comprehensive data and real-world experience showing that while we can't stop everything, we can greatly reduce those numbers, because a huge number of those shootings are crimes of immediate access and ease, or passion, where someone is going to walk down to a gun shop, like the kid in what the place was recently, who just went and got a gun and the next day went to school, and now you got a bunch of dead people. If you had simple things like background checks, waiting periods, all the common sense stuff to keep guns out of the wrong hands, that I think is the better way to go, which is why in Hawaii we have such a significantly lower rate of fatalities due to gun violence. The last thing I'll say is this, because I used to own a lot of guns when I lived on the mainland before moving back home. The things that are targeted by this bill, 50 caliber weapons and over, as well as high capacity magazines, are not things that you use as a sport shooter here in Hawaii. There's not even a place you can go to shoot a 50 caliber rifle at range legally. Secondly, that's not something you're going to defend yourself with, unless you're defending yourself from somebody like a mile away. There are way better tools, way better firearms to be able to do that when you're truly in danger in close proximity, if you even need to. Because to Gregg's point, having a firearm on you in a situation can often escalate rather than de-escalate, and often data shows you're going to end up with someone dead. Often it's going to be yourself, even if you're trying to defend yourself. But the second thing is, for the high-capacity magazines, that's also a situation where if you're a hunter, you don't want to be carrying massive amounts of rounds because it's really heavy, and you don't need 30, 50, 100 shots out of the same magazine before changing in order to hit a deer over there or what have you. Ultimately, these are tools that are made for hunting people, and they're made for weapons of war and for that purpose. That, I think, is where we draw the line and have to consider what is reasonable to comply with the Second Amendment and ensure everybody their right to not only defend themselves reasonably, but also engage in hunting and other sorts of sport shooting, and what is made available very easily to anybody when they're having mental health crises, or having a disagreement with their neighbor, or having any number of other situations, sadly out in your area as well, where what would be a fist fight suddenly escalates into a gunfight or something worse.
Okay.
That's really the purpose of the bill.
We're in our last 10-minute stretch here. Great discussion here with all three of our guests. Diamond, a pet issue, an issue not about pets, or maybe it is about pets, but an issue in particular to out west on Oahu, important to your constituents that you're focused on, would like to see some action on. And I'm going to ask similar question to Gregg and Chris.
Well, I think right now it's two parts. One is Hawaiian homelands, because right now we're building a lot of Hawaiian homelands in my community. Right now there's a project, phase 2 of the new homestead Ka'ulu o Kaha'i near the Kroc Center. And so there's phase 2 and phase 3 being built, about 8,000 new homes. Ho'opili is also being built. So right now our main focus is infrastructure, making sure that we have the adequate infrastructure to sustain our growing community. There's lots of new affordable housing projects going on right now. One thing right now that that our office is focusing on is working with schools to reduce the amount of bad behavior in schools. Multiple principals have reached out from our Campbell Kapolei complex saying, hey, since we came back from COVID-19, they've had major behavioral issues with students in schools. And lots of fights have happened. About 2 months ago, a big crew of kids from Waipahu High School came down to Kapolei, and there's a massive fight that blocked Kapolei Parkway for over half an hour. And it's increasing. So lots of residents are wondering, what can we do about this? So our office is coordinating right now to work with nonprofits and churches to work with kids in public schools to say what's going on, talk to them about their issues, because here's the reality, Chad. Lots of these kids have two parents or grandparents who are raising them. They're working 2-3 jobs, trying to pay the mortgage, pay the bills. They're not home to raise their children like it was in 1960, where there was a mom at home and dad at work. Today, that's not the case. And so these kids need guidance. They need mentorship, and our schools need to focus, I believe, on this behavioral issue.
And just real quickly, Campbell, if I remember correctly, has the highest enrollment. It's just too busy out there.
Campbell.
That's why they're building a new high school out west. Right?
Hundreds. Well, both Campbell and Kapolei have been over capacity for over 5 years.
Got it. Greg, Pearl City, what's important to folks out there?
Sure. Pearl City has among the highest percentages of kupuna in our communities. So,
which was one of our questions. What are we doing for kupuna?
All right. Well, one of the things we're doing is we're considering a family leave bill to provide paid family leave for employees up to 14 weeks per year to care for a loved one or a child or a baby who we've just given birth to. It would be paid for, financed by an employee contribution to be partly matched by the employer, and hopefully take effect whenever we can get it implemented. Another measure that's passed by the House over to the Senate is something called a silver alert. That's something that would alert everyone, law enforcement and everyone in the community, to an elderly person who may have dementia or Alzheimer's, and alert them, be on the lookout for so-and-so with a picture and everything. And that's personal for me. My dad suffered from dementia, and there was one night where he wandered off, and we, for the life of us, couldn't find him. We looked all throughout Kaneohe, and with the help of Kaneohe police, we finally located him. But for several hours, it's terrifying to think of what might have happened to him, either from someone inflicting violence on him or him simply being lost forever. And so this is something that I strongly believe, and thanks to Representative Corey Chun, who's the chair of our Kupuna caucus, for introducing it.
Just to clarify, in paid family leave, medical leave, employee contribution, employer contribution, is there not a state contribution as well, or is that not in the current bill?
No, it would be employers and employees.
Okay, good. Chris, to Waimanalo, Hawaii Kai, Kailua, what's important out there? A lot of things, probably.
Quite a few. I just wanted to comment because I didn't know about the House bills on the Kupuna Caucus priorities, but maybe this is how collaboration happens. I put in a measure, which we're going to be hopefully hearing soon, a resolution to do a working group just on creating some sort of public facility that would be able to house, with appropriate care, folks with dementia and other sorts of later stage Alzheimer's and other things like that. Fortunately, I recently discovered someone in my family has suffering from that as well. So I'm just learning about all this. But we will look at a number of other countries that are doing these kinds of care regimes, and a lot of them have facilities that are available so that folks like, I think your dad, you mentioned, and in Hawaii, there's 29,000 people with some sort of stage of this, and 6 in 10 will just wander off at some point, right? And so to be able to house them in a place that gives them the dignity and respect and freedom within a certain, village type model, but still is able to keep them in the same place and provide adequate care. That's something that a lot of other places do at reasonable cost because it's public. We don't have that here yet. So I just wanted to start that conversation. So for your consideration later. But I would say, on our side, often what we hear about most these days, traffic fatalities, particularly around schools. We've had a number of unfortunate near deaths just in the last couple of weeks. I was just actually at a community meeting near an elementary school about 3 weeks ago. And that night, as one of the families was coming, they were hit by a car outside the school. And anyway, there's a number of bills we're moving over right now to improve not only our infrastructure with sidewalks and crosswalks and all the proper bike lanes and things like that that are safe and protected to separate cars from people, but also reduce speeds in school zones and make sure that there are adequate measures in place to protect folks particularly the most vulnerable kids and kupuna who are walking in these areas.
Very good. We have 4 minutes left. 1 minute to each of you. Diamond, Chris, Greg, and then me.
Well, thank you again, Chris, for this panel discussion. We're about halfway through.
Chad, but call me Chris.
Sorry. Sorry. It was
You're welcome.
It rubbed off. Sorry. Chris, Greg, Chad. Okay. Thank you, Chad and Civil Beat, for having us here. We're halfway through. We look forward to looking at all the Senate bills that cross over and see what's good, what's bad. Once again, our job is to be that loyal opposition, so we will oppose. Thank you.
Chad?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate Greg and I think we're at the roughly halfway point. As has been mentioned, I'm looking forward to the House bills coming over. But I think, too, one thing to keep in mind out there, we're about to get a Council on Revenues report back, which is basically our state economists. They're going to say
next week or so, right?
Yeah, real soon. And they'll say whether or not our economy is going up or down. And what that's going to mean is how much of our budget we're going to have to change, in addition to all the Maui stuff that we talked about earlier and those funds. So that's going to be the single biggest change that probably affects the rest of the course of the legislature this year.
Good point. Greg?
Money, money, money. That's going to be the theme of the legislature.
We started with money
so far, and it'll be the theme that we have to look towards for the rest of the legislature. How much of it is available? Not enough, we know, for all the programs worthy that we want to pass, but we're just going to have to tighten our belts.
Okay, my thanks to Representative Gregg Takayama, Senator Chris Lee, and Representative Diamond Garcia. Definitely a big thanks to all of you in the audience and out there in video land, internet's land. Thank you to the legislature for providing this space. And a reminder to all of you that we will have a wrap-up, a final Civil Cafe on the legislature on Tuesday, May 7th. We will promote that on our website. Thanks, everybody. Great discussion today. Take care.